My cousin leaned into his webcam and said, "Watch this, Auntie. I'm about to make this wedding worth it." My stomach dropped. The little green microphone icons on my screen blinked like tiny alarms across 30 family squares. I was sitting alone at my kitchen table with my laptop propped on a stack of cookbooks, the kind with flower fingerprints still stuck in the spine. I'd pulled the curtains half closed to keep the afternoon glare off the screen, but the light still caught the fine lines around my eyes in a way that made me look more tired than I felt. Or maybe I just was that tired. My sister's wedding day had already been cut down to a screen and a prayer, and somehow I'd still managed to feel the weight of every expectation like it was a full ballroom on my shoulders. I wasn't supposed to be the one hosting. That had been the plan. My son, my sister's younger brother, had offered, eager, the way young men get when they think competence is the same thing as control. But the night before, he called me with that thin edge in his voice that told me he was overwhelmed. He'd been dealing with work deadlines, the stress of everyone being home, and the pressure of "don't mess this up" hanging over him like a guillotine. So I took it. I told him to send me the link, the guest list, the instructions. I told him to go breathe. I told myself it was just another thing a woman my age did without making noise about it. I've been smoothing chaos since before he learned to tie his shoes. The ceremony itself had gone beautifully. My sister sat beside her fiancé in their living room, a small vase of white flowers on the coffee table, an officiant's voice coming through a slightly tinny microphone. The sound wasn't perfect, but the moment was. When my sister looked into the camera and smiled, it was the kind of smile that held both grief and gratitude at the same time, like she was making peace with what life had stolen and choosing joy anyway. I had kept everyone muted the whole time, like she asked. I watched the family behave more or less. I watched Aunt Linda dab her eyes with a tissue. I watched my father sit very still, jaw clenched in that old habit of refusing to cry in public. I watched my sister's best friend mouth "I love you" into the camera, and I watched my cousin, with his bright grin and restless hands, bounce in his chair like he was waiting for his cue. When the officiant pronounced them married, I unmuted the room for the part my sister wanted, the part where people could speak, laugh, make it feel like a wedding again instead of a broadcast. "All right, everyone," I said, keeping my voice calm, warm, steady. "Congratulations to the newlyweds. If you'd like to say something, please raise your hand so we don't talk over each other." Hands lifted in little squares, a few waves, a few shy smiles. Then my cousin started flailing his hand so hard his whole camera shook. He was sitting beside his longtime girlfriend, both of them dressed up as if they were going to a venue instead of a screen. His girlfriend's smile was stiff, in that way women smile when they're bracing for something. My cousin's face shone with the confidence of someone who has never once asked permission in his life. I could feel my pulse in my throat. I knew him too well. I knew the way he'd always found a way to tilt attention toward himself, even as a boy. At family gatherings, if my sister and I got praised for a school project or a drawing, he'd suddenly, accidentally, knock a drink, or he'd get loud, or he'd sulk until adults turned to soothe him. He didn't just want love, he wanted the center. And now my sister's wedding had been stripped down to a fragile little square of happiness. There was nowhere for attention to go except the screen. I clicked his name to unmute him. His voice boomed out immediately, louder than everyone else, like he'd been waiting with his mouth open. "Oh my God," he said, laughing. "This is so inspiring, seriously. You two are such an inspiration. It's given me the courage to do this." My sister's smile tightened. Her fiancé glanced at her like, "Is he about to—" My cousin turned dramatically toward his girlfriend, like he was on a stage. He reached off screen and pulled up a small box. A ring box. I didn't breathe. For a split second, the room froze in that strange Zoom way, where you can't tell if people are reacting or buffering. Then I saw my sister's face on my screen, still polite, still trying, but something wounded flickering behind her eyes. I could almost hear her voice from the week before when she told me she didn't want anyone overshadowing them on the one day they were fighting to keep for themselves. My cursor hovered over the controls. My finger was suddenly too heavy. My cousin's girlfriend's eyes widened. She shook her head, tiny, quick, almost invisible. Not yes, not now. Please not now. My cousin didn't see her, or he did and didn't care. He cleared his throat dramatically. Babe. That was it. I clicked. Remove. His square vanished. The silence that followed was so sharp it felt like a slap. 30 faces stared at a blank space where his energy had been. Someone's dog barked in the background of another square, too cheerful for the moment. My sister blinked once, hard, like she was forcing herself not to cry. I didn't let my hands tremble. I didn't let my voice crack. "Oh," I said quickly, smooth as I could manage. "Looks like he had technical difficulties. We'll keep going." A few people nodded, relieved to be given a simple explanation they could accept without thinking. Someone chuckled awkwardly. My aunt adjusted her glasses. My father stared at his screen like it had betrayed him, too. My sister didn't say a word, but her shoulders lowered a fraction, as if she'd been bracing for impact and the blow had been stopped mid-air. I kept the room moving. I called on a cousin in another state to say something sweet. I let my sister's best friend speak. I watched the chat fill with congratulations and hearts and little claps, and I kept my face composed like a woman who had not just yanked a live wire out of the wall with bare hands. Then my phone began to buzz on the table beside my laptop, again and again, the screen flashing with my cousin's name like a warning I couldn't ignore. The buzzing didn't stop when the call ended. It followed me into the quiet of my kitchen, into the thin, ringing silence that comes after you shut down a screen full of voices. I closed my laptop gently, as if any sudden movement might crack something fragile inside me, and only then did I look at my phone. 9 missed texts, all from my cousin. My sister had just gotten married. I should have been crying, smiling, exhaling. Instead, I was standing barefoot on cold tile, my thumb hovering over messages I already knew would accuse me of ruining something that was never mine to protect. I didn't open them yet. I rinsed a mug in the sink I hadn't realized I was holding. The water ran too hot. I welcomed the sting. It reminded me I was still in my body, still capable of feeling something other than that tight, buzzing pressure behind my eyes. Another vibration. This time, a new name, my aunt, then my uncle. I set the phone face down. For a moment, I stood there listening to the refrigerator hum, the distant sound of a neighbor's lawnmower, the ordinary world continuing as if nothing seismic had just happened inside our family. My hands rested on the counter, palms flat, the way I'd learned to ground myself years ago when panic threatened to take over. I told myself one thing, and only one. You did what you were asked to do. The truth, though, doesn't always quiet the noise. When I finally picked the phone up, I didn't read everything at once. I opened the first message, the one from my cousin, because I knew it would be the loudest. "What the hell is wrong with you? I was finally doing something good, and you embarrassed me in front of everyone. You had no right." His words were sharp, quick, stacked one on top of another like they'd been fired off without breath. There was no question in them, no curiosity, only accusation. I scrolled. My aunt's message came next, longer, more measured, and somehow colder for it. She said she was disappointed. She said, "Family supports, family." She said my cousin had planned that proposal for months and that I'd humiliated him by making a scene. I stared at the word scene until it blurred. The irony of it almost made me laugh. I hadn't shouted. I hadn't argued. I hadn't even named what he was trying to do. I had simply removed him, quietly, efficiently, like you remove a splinter before it festers. Still, the narrative was already shifting. By the time my uncle's text came through, the story had settled into something familiar. My cousin as the wounded one, me as the overbearing older woman who couldn't mind her place. You always had a problem with him, the message said. This was supposed to be a happy moment. I felt something tighten in my chest. Happy for whom? I typed a response, deleted it, typed another, deleted that too. Every version sounded defensive, and I knew from experience that defense is just blood in the water for people who want to rewrite you as the villain. So I didn't answer. Instead, I walked back to my living room and sat on the couch where I'd been watching the ceremony. The imprint of my body was still there in the cushion, a shallow hollow shaped by hours of sitting too still. I pressed my hand into it and felt the fabric slowly rise back, erasing the evidence that I'd been there at all. My phone buzzed again. This time it wasn't anger, it was something quieter and somehow heavier. A message from my sister. "Are you okay?" Just 3 words. No accusation, no gratitude, just concern, suspended between us like a fragile bridge. I closed my eyes for a second before answering. My throat felt tight, but my hands were steady now. "I'm fine," I wrote. "How are you?" There was a pause long enough that I wondered if she was crying, or if she was simply exhausted by the weight of everyone else's feelings pressing in on her wedding night. Then her reply came. "Thank you." That was all. "Thank you." I let my head fall back against the couch. The room was dim now, the afternoon light shifting toward evening, turning the walls a dull gray blue. I realized I hadn't turned on a single lamp all day. Everything felt muted, like the world had lowered its volume but left the tension humming underneath. Another buzz. This one made my stomach drop before I even looked. A group message. Family thread. Someone, my aunt, I guessed, had added me to a conversation I hadn't been part of before. My name appeared at the top, newly included, like an invitation I hadn't accepted. Messages stacked quickly. He just wanted to share a beautiful moment. It wasn't about stealing attention. She didn't even let him explain. That was cruel. Cruel. The word landed hard. I watched the typing bubbles appear and disappear, people composing and reconsidering their judgments in real time. No one asked me what I saw. No one asked why I acted so fast. They were building a version of events that didn't require my voice at all. I noticed something else, too. Something small, but telling. No one mentioned my sister. No one asked how she felt, what she needed, or whether that moment had been hers to begin with. The focus had already slid, effortlessly, back to my cousin, like iron filings drawn to a magnet. My phone vibrated again, this time with a private message from a name I didn't expect, my cousin's girlfriend. "Hey," she wrote. "I just wanted you to know, I didn't know he was going to do that." I sat up straighter. She kept typing. "I actually told him not today. I'm sorry you're getting dragged into this." I read her words twice. Slowly, there it was, the thing no one else wanted to see. I didn't respond right away. I didn't know how without pulling her further into the line of fire. Instead, I locked my phone and set it on the table, face down again, like a secret I needed to protect until I knew what to do with it. Outside, the light had faded enough that the room was beginning to sink into shadow. I finally stood and turned on a lamp, the warm glow feeling almost intrusive after hours of harsh screen light and accusation. I wondered briefly if this would blow over by morning. I wondered how many times I'd thought that before and been wrong. My phone buzzed once more, and this time the name on the screen told me it wasn't going to be that simple. I grew up learning early that silence could be a form of survival, not the peaceful kind, the careful kind, the kind where you learn to measure the room before you speak, to notice who is already taking up all the air, to decide whether your words would land or simply disappear. Our house was small then. 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, the kind of place where you could hear every footstep, every argument, every sigh through the thin walls. In winter, the heat never quite reached the corners of the rooms. In summer, the air sat heavy and unmoving, like it didn't know where to go. We didn't complain. Complaining felt indulgent. My mother worked double shifts at the hospital. She came home smelling like antiseptic and stale coffee. her shoes always kicked off by the door in the same exhausted motion. My father did what he could, but money was a constant presence, not as a number, but as a tension. You felt it in the way lights were turned off behind you, in the way leftovers were repurposed into something new, in the way birthdays were acknowledged with cake, but rarely gifts. There was a jar on top of the refrigerator where spare bills went, 1s and 5s, folded small. It was for emergencies. It was always for emergencies. I remember standing on a chair once, reaching for it, feeling the glass cold against my fingertips, wondering what kind of moment would finally qualify as bad enough to open it. By the time I was 12, I knew how to stretch a dollar, how to read adults' moods, how to step in quietly when something needed doing. That instinct followed me everywhere, into adulthood, into marriage, into motherhood. My sister came after me, bright and sharp and full of questions. She had a laugh that filled rooms, even back then. I learned quickly how to stand slightly to the side so her light could shine without competition. It wasn't a sacrifice I resented. It felt natural. Someone had to hold the edges. My cousin was always there, too. Holidays, weekends, family gatherings that blurred together in memory. He lived louder than the rest of us. If something didn't center him, he found a way to redirect it. Adults called it confidence. I noticed the way conversations bent around him, the way attention followed his movements like a trained thing. Even as children, he bristled when praise landed elsewhere. If my sister got complimented on a school performance, he'd interrupt with a joke. If I was acknowledged for helping in the kitchen, he'd knock something over and grin like it was an accident. No one corrected him. They laughed instead, indulgent and tired. I learned then that some people are protected by the sheer force of being liked. When I married, it wasn't for fireworks. It was for steadiness. My husband was kind in the way quiet men often are, showing love through consistency rather than spectacle. We built a life carefully, the way people do when they're afraid of losing it. There were lean years. There were years when I kept track of every grocery receipt, every utility bill, every unexpected expense written down in a notebook I hid in the drawer with the takeout menus. That notebook became a kind of anchor for me. Not just numbers, notes too, reminders. Little calculations scribbled in the margins, proof that I was paying attention, that I was holding the threads together. When the kids were small, I worked part-time and filled the rest of my hours with logistics, permission slips, doctor appointments, homework, birthday parties managed on budgets that required creativity. I learned how to make things look easy when they weren't. I learned how to swallow frustration and keep moving. My sister watched all of this. She told me once, years later, that she learned how to survive adulthood by watching me do it first. I didn't know what to say to that. Praise has always made me uncomfortable. It feels like something you might drop if you don't hold it right. As time passed, family dynamics calcified the way they always do. Roles hardened. Expectations went unspoken, but firm. I became the one people leaned on without asking whether I could carry the weight. I was the reliable one, the reasonable one, the one who would understand. My cousin, meanwhile, moved through life like it was a stage set just for him. New jobs announced loudly, new relationships paraded, setbacks reframed as injustices done to him. There was always an audience, always an explanation that centered his feelings. His girlfriend came later, quiet, observant, the kind of woman who listens more than she speaks. I noticed the way she deferred, the way she laughed a half-second late at his jokes. I recognized that posture. I had worn it myself once. By the time my sister got engaged, the world had shifted into something fragile and uncertain. Plans fell apart everywhere. People learned how little control they actually had. My sister mourned the wedding she'd imagined, even as she tried to be grateful for what remained. She called me late at night sometimes, voice low, talking through fears she didn't want to burden her fiancé with. I listened. I always listened. When she asked me to help with the logistics of the Zoom wedding, I said yes without hesitation. I told myself it was practical. It was. But it was also familiar. Stepping in when something needed steady hands felt like breathing. We talked about the guest list carefully. She worried about interruptions, about people talking over her, about the moment being swallowed by noise. She said it gently, apologetically, as if asking for space on her own wedding day was something she needed permission for. I promised her I'd handle it. The day of the ceremony, I dressed neatly even though no one would see me. It felt respectful. I set up my laptop early, tested the sound, double-checked the controls. I kept that old notebook beside me on the table, the one with the worn cover and the bent corners, filled now with notes about muting and unmuting, names circled, reminders written in my careful handwriting. It grounded me, a habit carried forward from years of managing what couldn't be allowed to unravel. As the ceremony unfolded, I felt a familiar mixture of pride and protectiveness. My sister looked beautiful, even framed by a screen. The vows landed softly but firmly. The moment felt earned. Then came the part where the structure loosened, where control had to be balanced with trust. That was when my cousin leaned forward. And suddenly, decades of patterns snapped into focus with painful clarity. All the moments when attention had been redirected, all the times someone else's milestone had become his opportunity, all the indulgence that taught him there would never be consequences. I didn't think about my own reputation when I clicked that button. I didn't think about how it would look later. I thought about my sister's face, about that tightness around her mouth, about how small her day already was. I acted the way I always had. Quietly, decisively, without spectacle. And now, sitting alone with my phone lighting up with accusations, I understood something I hadn't wanted to admit before. The cost of being the one who holds things together is that when you finally draw a line, people notice the disruption more than the damage you prevented. My phone buzzed again on the table, vibrating against the wood, insistent and unresolved, and I knew this wasn't just about a Zoom call anymore. The shift happened quietly, the way pressure builds before anyone admits there's a problem. It started with messages that sounded reasonable on the surface, concerned, measured. My aunt asked if I'd had time to calm down yet. My uncle suggested maybe stress had made me overreact. A cousin I barely spoke to sent a long note about how these times are hard on everyone and how grace was important right now. No one asked what I'd seen. No one asked why my sister had gone silent for a moment that should have been hers. They spoke as if the facts were settled. I answered almost none of it. Silence had always been safer than explanation. And part of me still hoped this would dissolve if I didn't feed it. But silence, I learned again, can be interpreted however people need it to be. The family thread grew without me. I could see it from the outside, messages piling up, opinions stacking neatly into something that resembled consensus. Screenshots were shared, recollections adjusted. Someone wrote that my cousin had barely even started talking before I cut him off. Another insisted he'd told them afterward that he was planning to propose at the reception part, as if that distinction mattered. I felt my jaw tighten. One afternoon, my sister called. Her voice was soft, tired, pulled thin by the weight of too many expectations, pressing in from too many directions. "They're upset," she said carefully. I knew who they were without her saying it. "I know," I answered. There was a pause. I waited for the question that always came next, the one that usually asked me to smooth things over. Instead, she said, "I didn't want that to happen." My breath caught for just a second. "I know," I said again. Another pause. Longer this time. "They're saying you should apologize," she added, almost apologetically herself. I stared at the wall across from me. The paint there had chipped years ago, a small crescent-shaped flaw I'd never bothered fixing. It felt suddenly symbolic in a way I didn't have the energy to examine. "For what?" I asked. She didn't answer right away. When she did, her voice sounded smaller. "For embarrassing him." The word hit me harder than I expected. embarrassing him, not for disrupting her wedding, not for ignoring her wishes, not for turning her moment into his. The embarrassment belonged to him, even now, even after everything. I protected your day, I said quietly. I know, she repeated, and this time her voice wavered. I do, I don't want this to turn into something bigger. It already had. After we hung up, I sat very still. My hands rested in my lap, fingers curled loosely, like they didn't quite belong to me anymore. The room felt colder than it had a moment before, even though nothing had changed. That evening, my cousin sent another message, this one longer, more controlled, the kind of message meant to sound reasonable while delivering a blow. He wrote that he'd been hurt, that he'd trusted me, that my actions had humiliated him in front of family and his girlfriend. He wrote that I'd always had it out for him, that I'd never liked seeing him happy. That last part made something hollow open in my chest. I had spent years stepping aside so others could shine. I had carried more than my share of responsibility without complaint. And still, when I drew one boundary, the narrative twisted until I was cast as jealous, bitter, controlling. I typed a response, deleted it, typed another, deleted that too. Eventually, I sent one sentence. I did what my sister asked me to do. He replied almost instantly. She didn't ask you to humiliate me. I put the phone down. The next blow came in a different form. A few days later, my aunt called. Not to yell, not to accuse. Her voice was calm, almost soothing, which somehow made it worse. I just want to understand, she said. Why couldn't you let him finish? I closed my eyes. The afternoon light slanted through the window, pale and unforgiving, highlighting dust I hadn't noticed before. Because it wasn't his moment, I said. She sighed. Life is short. Love should be celebrated wherever it shows up. And my sister? I asked. Another pause, a long one. The kind that stretches until it becomes its own answer. Well, she said finally, she's already married. The sentence landed like a door quietly shutting. After that call, I noticed the subtle shifts. Invitations stopped coming. Conversations ended a little faster when I joined. Family members who used to check in regularly grew distant, their warmth cooling into polite restraint. At one point, I caught myself wondering if I really had been too harsh. The thought slid in quietly, wearing the voice of reason. Could I have waited? Could I have handled it differently? Was I too quick? That doubt lingered just long enough to bruise. Then came the moment that cut deeper than the rest. My cousin's girlfriend called me one evening. Her voice was shaky, tentative, like she was stepping onto thin ice. I didn't mean for any of this to happen, she said. I know, I answered. He's been telling people I begged him to propose, she continued, words tumbling out faster now. That I was devastated when you kicked him off, that I cried all night. I felt something twist in my stomach. Did you? I asked gently. No, she said, and there it was, the crack. I told him not to do it. I told him it wasn't the time. He said I was overthinking it. Silence stretched between us, heavy, loaded. I don't know what to do, she whispered. I wanted to tell her I understood. I wanted to warn her. I wanted to reach through the phone and offer something solid. Instead, I said, "You're not responsible for managing his feelings." She didn't answer right away. When she did, her voice was very small. No one's ever said that to me before. After we hung up, I sat there, phone still pressed to my ear, long after the call had ended. My reflection stared back at me from the darkened screen, older than I remembered, eyes tired but clear. The next family gathering happened without me. I found out through social media, photos posted with cheerful captions, everyone smiling like nothing had fractured beneath the surface. My cousin stood front and center in most of them, arms slung confidently around his girlfriend, who smiled politely, eyes distant. I scrolled past them slowly, feeling something sink low in my chest. No one had told me I wasn't invited. They hadn't needed to. The humiliation wasn't loud, it was quiet, surgical. A reminder that belonging could be revoked without announcement. I sat at my kitchen table again that night, the same one where I'd hosted the wedding, the same stack of cookbooks still propping up my laptop. I ran my fingers along the worn cover of my old notebook, the pages inside filled with years of careful attention, quiet labor, invisible effort. For the first time, I wondered who all that care had really been for. My phone buzzed once more, lighting up the table with a message preview that made my stomach drop before I even picked it up. The message wasn't from my cousin. It wasn't from my aunt or my uncle or anyone in the family thread that had slowly learned how to talk around me without including me. It was from my sister's number. "Can you come over tomorrow? Just you." I stared at the words until the light on my phone dimmed and the screen went dark, my reflection faintly visible again, still, waiting, unreadable, even to myself. Something in my chest shifted. Not relief, not fear. Clarity, sharp and cold. "Yes," I typed back. "What time?" The next day, I drove to her house just after noon. The sky was washed out gray, the kind of color that makes everything look unfinished. I parked at the curb and sat for a moment with my hands on the steering wheel, feeling the familiar ache in my shoulders that always came when I was bracing for something I couldn't yet see. Her door was unlocked. She'd always done that when she knew it was me. Inside, the house was quiet in a way that felt deliberate. No music, no television. Just the faint hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of traffic passing somewhere far away. The light in the living room was soft, filtered through sheer curtains, gentle enough to feel almost apologetic. My sister sat at the dining table with a mug cradled in both hands. She looked tired, not the happy exhaustion of a newly married woman, but the heavier kind that comes from carrying too many voices in your head. "Hi," she said. "Hi," I answered, and took the chair across from her. We sat there for a few seconds, just breathing. I noticed the way her fingers tightened slightly around the mug, how her shoulders were pulled up as if she were expecting a blow. "I didn't invite anyone else," she said quietly. "I just needed to talk without everyone weighing in." I nodded once. I didn't interrupt. I'd learned long ago that people speak more honestly when they don't feel rushed. "They keep calling," she continued. "They keep telling me how upset he is, how you embarrassed him, how this has become a whole thing." Her mouth pressed into a thin line. "And I keep thinking," she said, voice dropping, "why does everyone care so much about his feelings and not at all about mine?" There it was. The room felt suddenly very still. The light seemed to pause mid-air. "I didn't want to say it out loud before," she said, eyes fixed on the table, "because I didn't want to seem dramatic. But when he started talking, when he pulled out that box, it felt like my chest closed up, like someone had reached into my wedding and taken something without asking." My fingers curled against my palm. I stayed quiet. "I know you did what I asked," she said. "And I'm grateful. I just didn't realize how much I needed someone to stop him until you did." Her voice wavered, just slightly. That was the moment. Not loud, not explosive, just clean. All the noise from the past weeks, the accusations, the distancing, the subtle punishment, fell into place like pieces of a picture I'd been refusing to finish. I saw the pattern clearly now, not just in this moment, but across decades. Who was protected? Who was indulged? Who was expected to absorb discomfort so others didn't have to feel it? And who paid the price when that pattern was interrupted? "I'm not apologizing," I said calmly. My sister looked up, startled. "I won't apologize for protecting your day," I continued. My voice was steady, almost unfamiliar to my own ears. "And I won't accept being treated like I did something wrong because someone else didn't get to be the center of attention." She watched me carefully. I could see the relief flicker across her face, mixed with something else. Recognition, maybe. "They want me to ask you to," she said softly. "I know," I replied. "And if I don't?" she asked. I met her gaze. "Then they'll be upset with you too." She exhaled, a slow, controlled breath. "I'm already upset," she said. "I just didn't want to admit it." We sat there for a while after that, the silence between us different now, not heavy, clarifying. "I think he planned to propose no matter what," she said eventually. "He didn't ask, he didn't check, he just assumed." I nodded. He always does. She gave a small, humorless smile. I guess I never noticed how often everyone rearranges themselves around him. Neither had I. Not fully. I'd been too busy being one of the people doing the rearranging. When I left her house later that afternoon, the sky had shifted. Not brighter exactly, but clearer. Like the haze had lifted just enough to reveal edges again. I walked to my car with a strange lightness in my chest, not because things were resolved, but because something inside me had finally settled. I didn't feel guilty anymore. That realization followed me home. It sat with me as I made dinner, as I washed dishes, as I folded laundry that smelled faintly of detergent and warmth. The old notebook lay on the counter, open to a page of half-written lists, evidence of a life spent managing quietly. I closed it and set it aside. For the first time, I didn't feel the urge to fix what came next. My phone buzzed once more on the counter, lighting up the room with a name I recognized, and I didn't reach for it right away. I let the phone buzz itself, quiet. That felt like a small rebellion, even though it shouldn't have. For years, my reflex had been immediate response. Intercept, soothe, explain, absorb. Leaving the phone untouched on the counter while I finished drying a plate felt almost unnatural, like using a different hand to write. When I finally looked, the message was from my aunt again. I didn't open it. I slid the phone into a drawer instead, next to the old notebook I hadn't touched since leaving my sister's house. That night, I slept deeply for the first time in weeks. Not peacefully exactly, but without the sharp waking panic that had been slicing my nights in half. When morning came, the light through the bedroom window was pale and even, and for once I didn't feel behind. That was when the preparation began, not with confrontation, but with attention. I started noticing patterns I'd always half seen and dismissed. Who called me only when something needed handling? Who spoke warmly in private and coolly in groups? Who framed every conflict as something unfortunate that just happened to my cousin, as if he were weather instead of a person making choices? I didn't announce anything. I didn't threaten or warn. I simply paid closer attention than I ever had before. The first thing I did was open the notebook again. Its spine creaked softly, the sound oddly loud in the quiet kitchen. Inside were years of lists and figures, reminders written in my careful script. I flipped past grocery budgets and school notes until I reached the blank pages near the back. I began writing dates, the wedding date, the day the messages started, the day I was excluded from the family gathering. Under each date, I wrote what actually happened, not interpretations, not feelings, just actions. Who said what? Who contacted whom? Who stayed silent? Seeing it laid out like that did something to me. It stripped away the fog. The story people were telling didn't line up with the facts on the page. I didn't share this with anyone, not yet. A few days later, my cousin's girlfriend called again. This time, she didn't whisper. "I think I need to tell you something," she said. I sat down at the table before answering. "I'm listening." "He's telling people he planned the proposal with my family's blessing," she said. "He didn't. He ordered the ring without even asking me what I liked. He said surprises were more romantic." There was a pause. "And," she added, "he told me your sister would have loved it, that she'd thank him later." I closed my eyes briefly. "Did you correct him?" I asked. "I tried," she said. He laughed, said women get emotional about weddings. I wrote that down after we hung up. Not her words exactly, just the essence of them. I noticed other things too. A relative who'd scolded me publicly sent a private message asking if I'd really meant to cause harm. Another admitted, quietly, that they'd thought the proposal attempt was a bit much, but hadn't wanted to say anything. I saved those messages. I didn't respond with satisfaction. I didn't push. I simply let them exist. The silence from my cousin himself grew louder. He stopped messaging directly and started performing instead, posting photos online, captions heavy with meaning, comments carefully curated to suggest resilience and grace under attack. I didn't comment. I didn't react. My sister checked in every few days. Sometimes she talked. Sometimes she just listened to me breathe on the other end of the line. "They're pressuring me to fix this," she said once. "You don't have to," I replied. "I know," she said. And then, after a beat, "But I think they're going to make me choose." That settled something inside me. Preparation, I realized, wasn't about collecting weapons. It was about clarity, about refusing to be rushed into emotional corners anymore. I thought about how this would eventually surface, not as a screaming match, not as a dramatic reveal, but as something quieter and harder to refute. Truth has weight when it's calm. I organized the messages on my phone into a folder. I dated them. I wrote brief notes beside each one in the notebook, connecting them to the timeline. I asked my sister, gently, if she remembered exactly what she'd said to me about muting people during the ceremony. "I do," she said. "Why?" "I just want to be precise," I answered. She sent me a screenshot of the text she'd sent the week before the wedding, asking me to handle the call and keep interruptions to a minimum. I printed it and slid it into the notebook. I didn't feel angry doing any of this. That surprised me. What I felt was methodical, grounded, like someone restoring order after a long period of noise. The family thread eventually fell quiet, replaced by smaller side conversations. I could sense something building, a collective discomfort with the unresolved tension. People don't like uncertainty. They prefer clean villains and quick apologies. I wasn't giving them either. One afternoon, my uncle called. His voice was cautious. "We're thinking of getting everyone together," he said, "just to clear the air." I didn't answer right away. "Does that include my sister?" I asked. "Of course," he said quickly, too quickly. "And my cousin's girlfriend?" I continued. There was a pause. "I'm not sure." "Then no," I said calmly. He sounded taken aback. "No?" "No," I repeated. "I won't discuss something that involves her without her present, and I won't revisit my sister's wedding as if it were a debate." He sighed. "You're making this harder than it needs to be." "No," I said. "I'm making it accurate." After that call, I sat very still, aware of how steady my hands were. There was no tremor, no rush of adrenaline, just certainty. Later that evening, my sister called again. "They want to do a family meeting," she said. "Everyone, including him." "I know," I replied. "I told them I'd only come if you were there," she said. Something warm moved through my chest, quiet but strong. "Are you ready?" she asked. I thought of the notebook, the messages, the careful way I'd been paying attention, the way the story looked when stripped of sentiment. "Yes," I said. "I am." After we hung up, I went to the drawer and took the notebook out again. I added one more page, meeting. I didn't know exactly what would be said yet, or how it would unfold. I only knew I would not rush. I would not soften the edges to protect someone else's comfort at the cost of truth. The light in the kitchen faded as evening settled in, the room dim but clear, and for the first time I felt prepared not to be understood immediately, but to be accurate when it mattered most. The meeting happened in my sister's living room, not on a screen this time. In person, close enough to feel each other's breath, close enough that no one could mute what they didn't want to hear. The room was arranged too neatly, like preparation for a photograph no one wanted taken. Chairs pulled into a loose circle, coffee table cleared except for a single box of tissues set deliberately in the center, already assuming tears. The overhead light was on, too bright, flattening faces, leaving nowhere to hide. I arrived with my sister. She squeezed my hand once before we went in, a small pressure that said more than words ever could. My cousin was already there. He stood when we entered, smile fixed, posture relaxed in that practiced way he used when he expected an audience. His girlfriend sat beside him on the couch, hands folded tightly in her lap, eyes down. My aunt and uncle hovered near the window, talking quietly until we appeared. Conversation died instantly. Silence fell. It wasn't gentle. It was the kind that presses against your ears. "Thank you for coming," my uncle said finally, clearing his throat. "We just want to clear the air." No one responded. I sat down slowly, placed my bag at my feet, and rested my hands on my knees. They were steady. That surprised me again. My cousin exhaled loudly, shaking his head as if burdened by restraint. "I'll just say it," he began. "What happened at the wedding—" "Our wedding," my sister interrupted quietly. He paused. Smile flickering for half a second. It was hurtful. I was trying to do something meaningful, and I was cut off, publicly. He looked around the room, checking faces, gathering silent agreement. "I felt humiliated," he continued, "and honestly, I don't understand why it had to be handled that way." I waited. My aunt nodded sympathetically. "We just don't want resentment to grow in this family," she said, eyes darting briefly toward me. "Things could have been handled with more grace." Grace. That word again. My cousin leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "I think an apology would go a long way." The room seemed to tilt slightly, like the floor had shifted under our feet. I didn't speak yet. Instead, I reached down and took the notebook out of my bag. The sound of it opening, paper against paper, was quiet, but it cut cleanly through the room. Every eye moved to my hands. "I want to be very clear," I said calmly. My voice didn't rise. It didn't shake. "I'm not here to argue feelings. I'm here to talk about what actually happened." My cousin scoffed softly. "Seriously? You brought notes?" "I brought facts," I replied, meeting his eyes, "because the story being told about me doesn't match reality." My sister shifted beside me. Her back straightened. I turned the notebook so it rested open on my lap. "A week before the wedding," I continued, "you texted me nothing. You asked me nothing. You told me nothing about proposing." He opened his mouth to interrupt. I held up one finger. Not dramatic, just firm. "My sister," I went on, "asked me to host the call because she was overwhelmed. She asked me to keep people muted during the ceremony and to prevent interruptions afterward." I slid a printed page from the notebook and placed it on the coffee table. "That's her message," I said, in her words. My aunt leaned forward, adjusting her glasses. My cousin's girlfriend looked up sharply. "I acted on the instructions I was given," I said. "When you began turning her wedding into your moment." "That's not fair," he snapped. "I'm not finished," I said, still even. The room went very quiet. "You began a proposal," I continued, "on a day that was not yours, without asking the bride, without asking your partner." His girlfriend flinched. He turned toward her quickly. "That's not— Did you know he was proposing that day?" I asked her gently. The question hung in the air. She swallowed. Her hands tightened together. "No," she said softly. "I told him not to." The sound that followed wasn't loud, just a collective intake of breath, sharp and unmistakable. My cousin stared at her. "Why would you say that now?" "Because it's true," she replied, voice trembling but clear. "I said it wasn't appropriate. I said it wasn't about us." My aunt's mouth fell slightly open. "That's not what you told me," my cousin said quickly, turning back to the room. She was nervous, but she wanted it to be special. "No," she said again, louder this time. "I didn't." The overhead light hummed faintly. I flipped another page in the notebook. "After the wedding," I continued, "you told people I removed you out of spite. You told them I was jealous. You told them I embarrassed you intentionally. I looked directly at him. You didn't tell them you ignored my sister's wishes. You didn't tell them your girlfriend asked you not to do it. His jaw tightened. He looked to my uncle. This is being blown out of proportion. My sister spoke then, her voice steady but low. You made my wedding about you. He turned to her, incredulous. I was celebrating love. You were redirecting attention, she said, and I froze because I didn't know how to stop you. The room seemed to contract around her words. I asked her to handle it because I trusted her, my sister added, nodding toward me. And she did. Silence. My cousin shifted in his seat, the first visible crack in his confidence. So what, now I'm the villain? No one called you that, I said, but you don't get to rewrite what happened. My uncle cleared his throat. Maybe we all misread. I didn't, his girlfriend said suddenly. She stood up, hands shaking, but her spine straight. I saw exactly what happened. Every head turned toward her. He didn't listen to me, she continued. He never does. And when people defended him afterward, they didn't ask me once how I felt. Her voice broke, just slightly. She steadied herself. I was relieved when he was removed from the call, she said, because I didn't want to be proposed to like that. The words hit the room like dropped glass. My cousin stared at her, stunned. You're embarrassing me. She laughed once, short and bitter. That's exactly the problem. No one spoke for several seconds. The tissue box remained untouched on the table. Finally, my aunt sat back, her face pale. I didn't know, she said. That's because no one wanted to, I replied quietly. My cousin looked around, searching for support that wasn't there anymore. His posture collapsed inward, shoulders rounding, confidence draining from him like air from a punctured tire. This wasn't supposed to turn into this, he muttered. Truth has a way of doing that, I said. I closed the notebook and set it gently beside me. I'm not apologizing, I repeated just as calmly as before, but I am done being blamed for protecting someone else's boundary. The room stayed frozen. No one argued. No one defended him. The silence this time wasn't oppressive. It was exposing, and it lingered long enough that everyone understood something irreversible had just shifted. The room didn't erupt after that. There were no dramatic exits, no shouted apologies, no grand declarations of change. What followed was quieter, heavier, and in many ways more honest. People avoided each other's eyes. Someone finally reached for the tissue box, more out of habit than need. The overhead light still burned too bright, but it no longer felt like it was interrogating me. My cousin sat back down slowly, as if gravity had finally caught up to him. He didn't look at anyone. His girlfriend stood near the doorway, arms folded loosely now, breathing like someone who had just stepped out of deep water. My sister remained beside me. She didn't touch my hand this time, but she didn't pull away either. That felt like enough. Eventually, my uncle spoke, voice subdued. I think we all need some time. No one argued. We left shortly after, my sister and I walking out together into the late afternoon. The sky had softened into something pale and open, the air cooler than it had been earlier. We stood on the front step for a moment, neither of us rushing to speak. I didn't know I could do that, she said finally. Do what? I asked. Say no without apologizing, she replied. I smiled just a little. She hugged me then. Not tightly, just firmly enough to say she meant it. After that, things settled, not neatly, but honestly. The family didn't fracture, but it shifted. Conversations grew more careful. Invitations came with fewer assumptions attached. Some people kept their distance, unsure how to approach me now that I'd stopped smoothing over discomfort for them. Others reached out quietly, admitting they'd seen pieces of the truth but hadn't known how to name it. My cousin stopped calling. When I heard through the family grapevine that he and his girlfriend had separated, I felt no satisfaction. only a dull sadness for how long patterns can persist when no one challenges them early enough. My sister, on the other hand, grew lighter. She laughed more freely. She stopped explaining herself to people who didn't listen. She told me once, months later, that her wedding finally felt like hers, not because it had been perfect, but because it had been defended. As for me, something fundamental changed. I didn't become louder. I didn't become harder. I simply became clearer. I stopped volunteering to manage what others refused to handle themselves. I let calls go to voicemail. I answered questions directly instead of cushioning them. When people tried to pull me into old roles, I stepped back without drama. The old notebook still sits in my kitchen drawer. The pages are filled now, not with budgets or reminders, but with dates and truths written plainly. It used to be a record of how much I carried. Now it's something else entirely, a reminder of what happens when I stop carrying what isn't mine. Sometimes I open it just to feel its weight in my hands, not heavy anymore. Grounding. If my story stayed with you, I want you to know this. That notebook once held years of quiet endurance, but it now holds clarity. If you've ever been the one who protected the moment while being blamed for the disruption, you're not alone. And if you feel ready, you can share what you've been carrying too. I'm listening.